Hey everyone, it's Amanda from Pontes Books. Today we're going to dive into a vocabulary word from chapter one that I feel is probably pretty important to understanding the story. So that word is pauper. Obviously the title of the story, Prince and the Pauper. If you don't understand what a pauper is, then you're going to have a hard time understanding the story. Even if you do already know what it means, hopefully you'll learn something new watching this video. So let's break it down first. Just taking a look at the definition, kind of an obvious place to start. The word pauper is a noun, a person, place, thing, or idea. In this case, a person, a noun. Pauper is a noun, and it means a very poor person. So straightforward, like to keep my definitions without any mystery to them. Some facts or characteristic of a pauper. Obviously, poor. We get that from the definition itself. Typically, when a pauper is being described, like in the story The Prince and the Pauper, they're described as having a very shabby appearance. Their clothing maybe is falling apart a little bit. Maybe it's a little bit dirty, okay? That doesn't mean that everybody who wears shabby clothing and who is a little bit dirty is a pauper, but those are characteristics that are used to describe, in particular, this story, our pauper. Then if we look at some examples, so these would be kind of more modern day terms that you might see. We don't use the word pauper very much modern day. So it's more often you might see the word beggar or homeless person or even have-not, haves and have-nots. Otherwise, typically the terms that we use to describe someone who is has less money would be that they are lower income or they have a lower socioeconomic status. So those are kind of our fancy politically correct ways to use them, because nowadays calling someone a pauper would be probably considered pretty rude. Some non-examples. What is the opposite? What is not a pauper? That would be a king, a queen, a prince, or a princess. And that is exactly what Mark Twain is doing in this story, is he's trying to show those opposite lifestyles of a prince and a pauper. Also a millionaire, rich person, really even just an average person would not be considered a pauper. Breaking this word down a little bit more, we'll take a look at the etymology. That means the language that it comes from and kind of how it has sometimes transformed into the English form that we use today. In this case, it comes to us pretty directly from Latin. The word pauper meant poor, not wealthy, of small means. So again, pretty much the word didn't shift at all. And there was a phrase in forma pauperis, meaning in the form of a poor person. So sometimes we have these roots that go through these transformations. In this case, comes to us pretty directly. You'll also see a visual picture of our sad-looking pauper there. That is actually, I think, from a book cover of one of the versions of The Prince and the Pauper. So you can see kind of his shabby-looking clothing, and he also doesn't look very happy. So just a visual to go along with it as well. Now, taking a look at some sentences that use the word pauper. I always like to use two different types of sentences. One is a straightforward sentence where kind of all the words are simple, and then another one is kind of the real deal. Where are you going to see, how are you going to see this word in the actual story? So our straightforward sentence, we passed the pauper dressed in rags while walking through the town square. So that sentence still gives you enough information about what you're seeing. Someone who's dressed in rags is described as a pauper. So that helps you to understand more about what that word means, but it's still pretty straightforward. Then the sentence that we see this word in the actual chapter, in chapter 1, you'll notice I added some ellipses in there to cut out some of the extra language, but in general, the sentence isn't too bad. So Tom Canty lapped in his poor rags among the family of paupers whom he had just come to trouble with his presence. So this is right at the beginning of the story, right when Tom Canty is born. So we see that he is born to a family of paupers, and we see also that they weren't thrilled that he was born. So that really sets up the story for us. We learn a lot about Tom Canty just in that first chapter. Some other forms of the word, since it's a noun, you might see it in its plural form, paupers, more than one pauper. Otherwise, there's also a word that exists, pauperism. It's kind of a synonym for poverty, the state of being a pauper. It's also a noun. Probably won't see that very often, though. More often, you'll see the word pauper or paupers. And then finally, some fun facts about the word pauper. Normally in this section, I like to kind of pull pop culture references or show idioms using the words. We don't really have a whole lot of those with the word pauper, so the best I have is some modern parodies kind of the story of The Prince and the Pauper. We see a Barbie version, there's a Mickey Mouse version. Also, if you're familiar with the earlier days of Dylan and Cole Sprouse, they had a version as well. There's all sorts of parodies of this story, modern day. Some of them use the term pauper in the title, some of them don't. Another reference that I saw was one to magic cards. So again, don't know if people are still doing that. I don't know how much of a pop culture reference this is, but there is a format of play where you are only allowed to play with cards that have a common rarity. So if you're not familiar with the cards, they each have these little symbols on them that represent different rarities. So when you're getting these cards, you know, it's obviously desirable to get the ones that are more rare. But those cards typically, even though they're not necessarily better, they tend to be a little bit more complex and then be, you know, a little bit more powerful to use. So the pauper form of the game does not allow any of those higher rarities, just the common one. So I guess the connection that you could see there is that would be a less expensive way to play the game because you're not paying for those more expensive cards. So that's all I have for the word pauper. Hopefully you learned something by watching this video, and tune into the other ones that we'll have later. Thanks.